When the Roman Empire fell, you had what they called the Dark Ages, and that was the period they went into, a period of time lasting about 1,000 years, which is a devolved reshaping of society. A lot of what made the Roman Empire rich in culture was eventually destroyed by various tribes and barbarians that invaded, which eventually broke the chains that the Romans developed within their empire with language, philosophy, and the development of science and things of that nature, which led Christianity taking over, getting rid of the polytheistic pagan-like religion that the Romans had and developing over time to become a great success in many different countries, especially somewhere like Ireland, for example, with Christianity. But during the Dark Ages, many people forgot how to read. They forgot how to write, to build, and to have fundamental abilities to develop human societies. Because of all of this, especially among the peasants, but because there was no centralized government, like the authority from the Roman Empire, you ended up having feudal economic systems, instead run by lords who owned loads of land. The peasants could then work the land for the sake of a little bit of income, protection by the landowners, and didn't really do or could do anything else at this point. But these peasants never really did anything else. They just worked land, didn't have much freedom, couldn't develop within a social hierarchy or climb up the social hierarchy to become lords themselves, and never really went anywhere, to be honest. Now, this is all really important because we are all probably heading straight into some sort of dark age because of the pandemic and the outcomes of the pandemic has allowed everything around us to basically slowly fall over in the next couple of years. And this dark age will be supported by a form of neo-feudalism due to what the pandemic situation has brought about, basically. And a lot of people have been talking about this over the past year, about neo-feudalism brought about by the pandemic, where the lords in this instance will be the globalized corporations and the peasants will be the ones working for them, basically. Because as we all know, it has been the upper class and multi-million neoliberal corporation owners that have strangely benefited from the social and economic catastrophe. But how will this feudal-orientated system play out? Now, there is a fundamental problem missing here that I have not mentioned. Technology. Why is that a problem? Well, if we had the technology that we have, let's have a thought experiment here. If we had the technology that we have today and we time travelled back in time and placed all that technology into the hands of the people who were within the Dark Ages, for instance, would they rely on the people to do the work for landowners within a feudal system? No, probably not. So what would happen to the peasants? Or the lower class people in general, which would be the majority of the population by that time, if the technology existed to replace them and their work? Now there's a question for you. Now, it's all well and good if the feudal system is in place to protect the people, if they have nowhere else to go and it's their only hope and the individuals in power have fundamentally good intentions. But in the reality of today on a mass scale, you have the technology, so what will be done with the people? This is the situation we're in. So they will probably want to get people put on some sort of UBI, Universal Basic Income System, for a digital currency that has been developed through a one world government system of some kind. Instead, that's probably the ideal, and probably the reason why Gates doesn't really like things like Bitcoin. Or why certain government officials have come out and said they don't like Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies. They start advising you that you should not invest in them, when the only reason why is probably because they are independent of the state. That these cryptocurrencies have not been made by the government or controlled by the government yet. And the more they get attention, the more investment they get by the general populace, the more difficult it will be for governments to ban them in whatever country it may be. And that itself, that dialectic between the people and the patriarchal system government, as I said in another video, is the indication of the Aeon of Horus, the crowned child. Will the powers end up residing in the people, or will it continue to remain in the big patriarchal structures and institutions of big business and big bank, who I think want to fundamentally make their own digital currency and get rid of everything else, every other cryptocurrency? They don't like it, I don't think. So away from the economics and the devastating reality that may be, because I could go on further, but I don't want to depress people too much to the point of nihilism and something like inertia or inaction. But instead, I want to bring up the barbarians again, because this also relates to today with relation to the era or collective ego shift we are going through. Because who are the barbarians today that tore down the Roman Empire? Their statues, temples and architectural building work and all of this. It's the weird far left people doing what the barbarians did during the end of the Roman Empire. It's the same thing. It's history repeating itself. And of course it's them that are doing it because they are the progressives. It's the nature of being progressive and how eras or new eras erupt and come to be the next culture, or the next collective culture, or the next collective ego. It's history repeating itself. And of course, it's them that are doing it because they're progressives, the opposite of what this era we are coming out of used to represent. You know, the progressives are always the opposite of what the conservative era is. So what is that? It's basically anti-Christ. The opposite of Christ, which is moral relativism, the opposite of spiritualism, which is materialism and atheism, and that as a foundation allows for all these other ideals to build up around it as building blocks. But because it's anti-Christ, it does not mean it is not anti-religious, even though I just said atheism. The new era is, in the way I see it, some sort of neo-paganism, and I'm going to go deeper into this and what this means, in my view. Because the reason why it's neo or new paganism is because you will have the transhumanism and the technological ideal in there with it, you know, what the pagans didn't have. It will be a paganism merged with technology, which sounds very paradoxical, but is definitely something that is developing today, I think. You know, earth worship with the use of green technology, which is spiritualizing the material world, the complete opposite of Christianity, you could say. It's a modern development of paganism with the use of things like green technology. Thus, the Christian understanding of good and evil will be done away with, and it will be replaced with an earthbound morality merged with technology. So, for example, let me just play out the structure of what I think with regards to technology. You know, we've had technology since the Industrial Revolution. And it's something very masculine. It's got a very masculine energy to it. That's what technology is, as what we have known it to be. You know, in its nature, it's determined, phallic, with a single-minded direction of determination, with one-sided intent. You know, it's to produce, to breed something of value. Not very feminine at all. But with this neo-pagan movement, if you will, we will start seeing technology become more feminine as we are seeing it today, as it starts to become holistic, compassionate, and caring for the earth, in a sense. It will start to be symbolic of a pagan morality, because the technology itself will be developed around the premise of worship, you know, such as sun worship, wind worship, etc. All of these things, which is the inversion of technology as we know it, on the kind of energy side with regards to things like masculine and feminine. Technology is typically understood today as being masculine because it goes against nature, but through its inversion we will be making it feminine to live in harmony with nature. But saying this, I don't know if it will work. You know, I don't think technology can be as competent if its nature is orientated around the feminine, or a feminine energy, if you will. And we are already seeing things like this in Texas with windmills, for example, getting frozen. You know, well, what does that say? Competence decreases when something or someone relies on someone else, or on something else. So if that's true for people, that is true for technology as well. If you get rid of the masculine energy with technology, you also are getting rid of its will to power of being a machine in action, and instead turning it into a receiver of action, a receiver from the powers of nature itself, to transform that into some sort of technological energy, which in itself, as a function of what that technology will be, is a feminine energy, being a receiver, not a doer or a doing process. And to receive from nature alone is very dangerous because nature is much more powerful. So this is the kind of weird kind of situation you've got yourself into. So making the machine or technology feminine is no different to how the digital in its nature is feminine. Okay, other channels and myself have talked about the digital mother with relation to Jungian psychology, or the digital anima with relation to the internet. So I won't go into that right now, but I want to talk about more surrounding the morality of this new era, or this neo-paganism concept that I've kind of developed for what I see the future as being. Because this entire thing, this neo-paganism, is all predicated on climate change. Is it a completely genuine reality, climate change? Because if it is, then we are most definitely going into this movement. If it isn't, we are probably still going to go into it anyways, for the sake of the power grabs that are available with regards to all of this, that are at play here. So the morality surrounding this will be very basic, in my view. What will be deemed good is that which is for the preservation of the planet. That which makes it thrive, that makes it grow and be prosperous. The planet will be deemed sacred and not the individual will. The individual soul will be overlooked with materialism. So economically speaking, things like free market capitalism won't exist, probably. So with regards to morality, this era shift expresses the reality that Nietzsche talked about, with morality being beyond good and evil. Because what could be deemed evil or immoral now will be deemed good in the new era. Okay? For example, depopulation seen as a virtue because it preserves the planet. No different from the pagan sacrifice. The sprouting of this perceived ideal, you could say, as an example of it appearing now, can be seen in what is happening in the anti-natalist movement, for example, as a sprouting of this idea. Moral laws and codes like that, because the moral foundation for that new era would have changed. The first principle will not be the same as the last era. The first principle will most likely be the opposite of the last era. So, for example, as another one, the individual as an entity of life will not be seen as the sacred entity anymore. It will instead be the Great Mother as the sacred entity, the digital mother. It won't be like a paganism of people running around fertility stones or something like that, or anything like that. But a paganism infused with this digital mother and a technology, which will become inverted into a more feminine energy for the sake of the planet. Now, with me hypothesizing all of this, I don't think it is inevitable, because it isn't. Eras change dependent on which ego wins, which collective ego will win. What is indicative of being within the middle of an era shift is division, massive division. Okay, so we have all of these egos fighting each other for survival at the moment, and not all of them have come out yet to play in the mainstream. For example, the biggest players in the West are things like Christianity and parts of what the scientific enlightenment have allowed to create with regards to like green technology, atheism and materialism. The culture of that ego, though, that the latter one that I mentioned, is not fully developed yet, though. That's why it has all these separate ideologies associated with each other. But from what I see, I would call it a form of neo-paganism from just my perspective, or at least that is what it desires to be, I think, by the people who want it to be, or want it to win over all other ideologies or collective ego movements for the new era. So it links me back to what I was saying at the start of the video. The Roman Empire followed paganism, and Christianity came in to destroy the Roman Empire. We right now are kind of living in a plural yet divided world of different egos fighting each other. The one I see coming up on top, if you will, is this kind of neo-paganism that I've been describing. But ultimately, it's still a bit too early to tell. We will see when history makes it so. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like, comment your thoughts down below, because I think this is quite an interesting little video that I've made up here. Subscribe, share it around, tell me what you think in the comments. Make sure to go on my website thoughtsonthinking.org so you subscribe to the newsletter for articles on a date or on a weekly basis. So if you enjoyed it, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.